The story begins on an ordinary day, one that seemed like any other for a woman who lived a quiet life in a small town surrounded by green hills and thick forests. This was her world, a peaceful place where nothing much happened, and she liked it that way. She worked as a librarian at the local library, spending most of her days helping people find books or recommending their next favorite read. Her job wasn't glamorous, but it brought her joy because she loved seeing how stories could change someone's perspective or mood. She wasn't the kind of person who craved attention. In fact, if anything, she preferred being invisible. She enjoyed the comfort of routine, the same walk home every evening, the familiar faces in the park, and the calm rhythm of her daily life. But sometimes fate has its own plans, and no matter how hard we try to stay hidden, life pulls us into situations we never expected. On this particular afternoon, autumn had painted the trees in shades of orange and yellow, and the air carried a slight chill. As always, she took her usual route through the park after work. The path was lined with benches where people sat chatting, kids played tag, and dogs chased frisbees. It was just another beautiful day, until it wasn't. Suddenly, a scream cut through the peaceful atmosphere. It was sharp, piercing, and full of panic. Everyone froze for a moment, unsure of what was happening. Then came more screams, louder this time, coming from somewhere near the playground. Without thinking twice, she dropped her bag and ran toward the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. When she reached the source of the commotion, she saw something that made her blood run cold. A little girl, no older than 6, was crying hysterically as a large pit bull tugged at her sweater, dragging her across the grass. The dog's teeth were bared, its growls low and menacing. Nearby, a man stood frozen, his face pale with fear. He was clearly the dog's owner, but he looked too terrified to do anything. Time slowed down for her in that moment. She didn't stop to think about the danger she might be putting herself in. All she knew was that the little girl needed help, and fast. Spotting a sturdy stick lying on the ground nearby, she grabbed it and charged toward the dog. With all her strength, she swung the stick, hitting the ground close enough to startle the animal. The dog turned its attention away from the child and lunged toward her instead. Her hands trembled as she held the stick firmly, trying to keep the dog at bay. Adrenaline surged through her veins, giving her the courage she didn't know she had. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, the dog let go of the girl's sweater. The child scrambled backward, sobbing and shaking but safe. By then, others had gathered around, calling animal control and checking on the little girl. Someone even offered her a blanket to wrap around her shoulders. As paramedics arrived to tend to the shaken child, she quietly slipped away. She didn't want recognition or thanks, she just wanted to get back to her normal life. Her hands were scratched and her clothes were dirty, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that the little girl was okay. She told herself over and over again that anyone would have done the same thing. But here's the twist. She had no idea that saving that little girl would set off a chain of events that would completely change her life. She couldn't have guessed that the child's family was unlike anyone she'd ever met before, or that they had connections far beyond her imagination. For now, though, she simply walked home, unaware of the storm brewing ahead. Little did she know her act of bravery hadn't gone unnoticed. Someone very important was watching closely, determined to find out more about the woman who risked everything without asking for anything in return. And soon, her quiet existence would collide with a world of wealth, power, and surprises she could never have predicted. The little girl who had been saved that day wasn't just any child. She came from a family whose name carried weight, not just in the small town where the incident happened, but across the entire state. Her father was a man who didn't need introductions in certain circles. He owned vast stretches of land, shopping malls, luxury hotels, and even parts of the city skyline. His business empire was massive, and his influence reached far beyond what most people could imagine. But despite all his wealth and power, he was also a deeply private person. He rarely gave interviews, avoided social events, and kept his personal life hidden away from the public eye. When news of the attack reached him, he was both furious and terrified. Furious because no parent should ever have to hear that their child was in danger, and terrified because for a few moments He thought he might lose her forever. When he finally learned the details, how a stranger had stepped in without hesitation to save his daughter, he felt something else. Gratitude. Deep, overwhelming gratitude. But it wasn't just gratitude that drove him. It was curiosity. Who was this woman? What kind of person would risk their own safety like that? Most people would freeze in a situation like that, paralyzed by fear or uncertainty. Yet she hadn't hesitated for even a second. That kind of bravery intrigued him. He wanted to know more about her, not just because she had saved his daughter's life, but because he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something special about her. So, he decided to find out everything he could. With resources at his disposal that most people could only dream of, it didn't take long for him to piece together her story. Security cameras in the park had captured the whole scene, showing her running toward the dog when everyone else was backing away. They showed her standing her ground, holding that stick like a shield, refusing to let the animal hurt the little girl. And they showed her walking away afterward, not seeking attention or praise, just quietly disappearing into the crowd. What struck him most was how ordinary she seemed. She wasn't some trained professional or someone used to handling high-pressure situations. She was just a regular person, a librarian, living a quiet life in a small town. Someone who probably never imagined herself stepping into the middle of something so dangerous. There was something incredibly admirable about that. It reminded him of a time when the world felt simpler, before money and power complicated everything. He watched the footage over and over again, studying her face, trying to understand what made her tick. Was she brave because she didn't think about the consequences? Or was it something deeper? A sense of duty maybe, or an instinct to protect others no matter the cost. Whatever it was, it fascinated him. And the more he learned about her, the more determined he became to meet her. At first, he debated sending someone else to deliver his message of thanks. Maybe a letter or a gift basket would be enough. After all, he was a busy man, and tracking down someone he didn't know personally wasn't exactly part of his usual routine. But then he realized that wouldn't feel right. This wasn't just a casual thank you. This was personal. So he decided to go himself. It took some planning. He wasn't the kind of person who blended into the background easily. People tended to notice when he showed up somewhere, and he didn't want to overwhelm her. He wanted to approach her as simply another human being, not as the billionaire tycoon everyone read about in the papers. Still, he knew his presence would raise eyebrows, especially in a place like the library where she worked. But he didn't care. For once, he wasn't thinking about appearances or what other people might say. He just wanted to see her face to face. And so one afternoon, he found himself standing outside the library. It was a modest building tucked between a bakery and a hardware store. Nothing flashy, nothing extravagant. Just a cozy little space filled with books and quiet corners. As he stepped inside, he felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The smell of old paper and ink surrounded him, and for a moment, he forgot about the chaos of his usual life. He spotted her almost immediately. She was helping a young boy pick out a book, her expression warm and patient. Watching her interact with the child, he saw a kindness that matched the courage she'd shown in the park. It wasn't forced or performative. It was genuine. The kind of warmth that came naturally to some people but eluded others no matter how hard they tried. When she noticed him standing there, she looked surprised. Not many people dressed in tailored suits visited the library, especially not ones with the kind of commanding presence he had. But instead of turning away, she smiled politely and asked if she could help him find something. He shook his head and introduced himself, explaining why he was there. "I'm here because of what you did," he said, his voice steady but soft. "You saved my daughter's life." For a moment, she just stared at him, unsure of what to say. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Anyone would have done the same," she replied, brushing off his words like they were nothing extraordinary. But he didn't believe her, not for a second. Because deep down, he knew the truth. Not everyone would have done what she did. And that's what made her different. The man's visit to the library was unexpected, to say the least. She had been going about her usual routine, helping patrons find books, organizing shelves, and chatting with the regulars who stopped by for their weekly reads. Nothing out of the ordinary. But when he walked in, dressed impeccably in a suit that screamed importance, everything changed. For a moment, she felt like she'd stepped into someone else's life, not her own. He didn't waste time with small talk. He got straight to the point, explaining who he was and why he was there. "You saved my daughter," he said, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "I wanted to meet you." Her first reaction was surprise, followed quickly by discomfort. She wasn't used to being the center of attention, let alone having someone as powerful as him standing in front of her. All she could think about was how much she hated being singled out for something she considered normal. Saving the little girl hadn't been heroic. It had just been the right thing to do. Anyone else would have done the same, or so she believed. But he didn't see it that way. To him, what she had done was extraordinary. He explained that he had seen the security footage from the park and couldn't stop thinking about her bravery. He told her how grateful he was, not just for saving his daughter, but for reminding him that there were still good people in the world, people who acted selflessly without expecting anything in return. She tried to brush it off, insisting she hadn't done anything special. But he wasn't convinced. Instead, he invited her to dinner at his home, a grand estate perched on a hill overlooking the town. At first, she refused, feeling out of place even considering such an invitation. What did she, a librarian living paycheck to paycheck, have in common with someone like him? But he was persistent, almost gentle in his insistence, and eventually she agreed. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was the sincerity in his eyes that made her say yes. That evening, as she stood outside his mansion, she felt completely out of her element. The house was enormous, with tall windows, polished floors, and artwork that probably cost more than her entire apartment. A butler greeted her at the door and led her inside, where the man was waiting in a dining room lit by candles. The table was set elegantly, with fine china and sparkling silverware. It was worlds away from the simplicity of her own life, and she couldn't help but feel like she didn't belong. But he put her at ease almost immediately. He wasn't the intimidating figure she had imagined. Instead, he was warm and approachable, asking questions about her work, her hobbies, and her thoughts on books. They talked for hours, sharing stories and laughing over silly moments. She learned that beneath the polished exterior was a man who carried heavy responsibilities and often felt lonely because of them. Despite his wealth, he struggled with finding genuine connections. His daughter meant everything to him, and losing her mother years ago had left a void in both their lives. As the night went on, he surprised her with a gesture she hadn't anticipated: a check. It was a generous amount, far more than she earned in a year. He explained it was his way of saying thank you, a token of appreciation for what she had done. But instead of feeling grateful, she felt uneasy. Accepting money felt wrong, like it diminished the act itself. She shook her head firmly and pushed the check back toward him. "I can't take this," she said. "I didn't save your daughter for money. I did it because it was the right thing to do." Her refusal caught him off guard. Most people would have accepted it without hesitation, but here she was, turning down something that could change her life. He admired her integrity, but it also puzzled him. Why wouldn't she accept help when it was offered? Was it pride, or was it something deeper? Despite her rejection of the gift, the evening ended on a positive note. As they said goodbye, he promised to stay in touch, and true to his word, he began visiting the library regularly, always finding excuses to see her again. Sometimes he claimed he needed book recommendations. Other times he brought gifts: flowers, chocolates, handwritten notes. Each gesture was thoughtful, showing that he valued her presence in his life. At first, she was hesitant. His world was so different from hers, and she worried about getting swept up in something she didn't fully understand. But over time, she started to let her guard down. There was something about him that felt real, something that resonated with her. Beneath the wealth and power was a man who craved connection, just like anyone else. And despite their differences, they discovered they shared many of the same values: a love for literature, a desire to make a difference in the world, and a longing for meaningful relationships. Still, not everyone was happy about their growing bond. Some of his business associates whispered behind closed doors, questioning his interest in someone like her. Others speculated whether she was using him for his money. Even his daughter, though fond of her, expressed concerns. She loved her father deeply and didn't want to see him hurt again after losing her mother. The whispers reached her ears eventually, and they stung. She had never asked for any of this, never sought out fame or fortune. Yet here she was, caught in the middle of gossip and judgment. It made her question whether she belonged in his world at all. Could two people from such different backgrounds truly find common ground? Or was their connection doomed from the start? For now, though, neither of them was ready to give up. Both were drawn to each other in ways they couldn't explain, and both were willing to fight for what they had found. Little did they know their journey was only beginning, and the challenges ahead would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. As weeks turned into months, their connection grew stronger. At first, it had been tentative, two people from vastly different worlds trying to find common ground. But slowly, they began to open up to each other in ways neither had expected. He was used to living behind walls, literal ones made of brick and glass and metaphorical ones built by years of protecting himself from judgment and scrutiny. She, on the other hand, had always lived openly, without pretense or ambition beyond her quiet life. Yet somehow those differences didn't drive them apart. Instead, they became the foundation of something real. He started showing up at the library more often than he probably should have. Sometimes he'd come during slow hours, sitting quietly in the corner while pretending to read a book. Other times he'd bring coffee for her and the staff, earning smiles and nods from everyone even though no one quite understood why such an important man would bother visiting a small-town library. He always had an excuse ready. I'm researching a new project, or I need recommendations for my daughter. But she knew better. These visits weren't just about books. They were about her. She tried not to overthink it. After all, his kindness was hard to resist. He wasn't flashy or overbearing. Instead, he went out of his way to make her feel comfortable. They talked about everything under the sun: books, movies, childhood memories, dreams they hadn't yet fulfilled. Through these conversations, she discovered layers to him that most people never saw. Behind the polished suits and expensive cars was a man who loved deeply, cared fiercely, and carried wounds from losses he rarely spoke about. His daughter meant the world to him, and losing his wife had left a hole in his heart that nothing seemed to fill. For her part, she shared pieces of herself too, things she didn't normally talk about with others. She told him about growing up in a modest household, how books had been her escape when life felt overwhelming. She spoke about her love for helping people, whether it was recommending the perfect novel or simply listening when someone needed to vent. And she admitted that sometimes she wondered if she was doing enough with her life. Was working at the library truly making a difference? Or was she settling for less because it was safe? He listened intently, never interrupting, never judging. When she finished speaking, he looked at her with admiration in his eyes. "You're remarkable," he said one day. "You don't see it, do you? You've dedicated your life to helping others, to making the world a little brighter. That's more than most people can say." His words stayed with her long after their conversations ended. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe her quiet life held value, not just to her, but to others too. And as their bond deepened, she realized she was starting to care about him in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just gratitude for his attention or curiosity about his world. It was something deeper, something that scared her a little, because it felt so unfamiliar. But not everyone approved of their growing relationship. In fact, whispers of disapproval began circulating almost immediately. Some of his business associates raised eyebrows, questioning why he was spending so much time with someone like her. They didn't understand what she could possibly offer him, or worse, they assumed she had ulterior motives. A few even hinted that she might be using him for his wealth. though anyone who knew her would know how ridiculous that accusation was. The gossip reached her ears eventually. She heard snide comments at the grocery store, saw sideways glances from strangers, and noticed articles popping up online speculating about their relationship. At first, she tried to ignore it, telling herself it didn't matter what others thought. But as the rumors spread, it became harder to brush them off. People she had known for years suddenly acted differently around her, unsure whether to trust her motives. Friends distanced themselves, afraid of being dragged into the drama. Even some of her co-workers seemed hesitant to engage with her, worried about being associated with controversy. It hurt more than she let on. She had never asked for this kind of attention, never sought to disrupt her peaceful life. All she had done was help a child in need, and now, it felt like the entire world was watching her every move. Doubts crept in. Was she being selfish by continuing to see him? Was she setting herself up for pain by stepping into a world she didn't belong in? One evening, overwhelmed by the weight of it all, she decided to confront him. Sitting across from him in the cozy cafe where they often met, she took a deep breath and said, "Maybe we should take a break. Us, it's causing too much trouble. I don't want to be the reason your life gets complicated." He stared at her for a moment, then sighed. "Do you really think walking away will solve anything?" he asked gently. "People are always going to talk. They'll judge me no matter what I do. What matters is how we feel about each other. Do you honestly believe I'd let public opinion dictate my happiness?" She didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to argue, to insist that she couldn't handle the pressure, but another part of her, a deeper, quieter part, knew he was right. If they stopped seeing each other just because others disapproved, wouldn't that mean letting fear win? Wouldn't that mean giving up on something that brought them both joy? Before she could answer, he reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm not asking you to change who you are," he said. "I love you for exactly who you are, and I'm willing to fight for this, if you are." Her heart skipped a beat. Love. He had said the word so casually, so naturally, that it caught her off guard. Did she feel the same way? Yes, she realized. Somewhere along the way she had fallen for him too, not because of his money or status, but because of the man beneath it all, the man who listened, who cared, who saw her in a way no one else ever had. "I'm scared," she admitted softly. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to deal with all of this." "You don't have to be strong alone," he replied. "We'll face it together." In that moment, she made a decision. She wouldn't let fear or judgment define her. If their love was worth fighting for, and she believed it was, then she would stand by him no matter what challenges lay ahead. Little did they know, the hardest test was still to come. Public opinion was one thing, but proving their relationship to those closest to them would be another battle entirely. Could they withstand the pressure from his inner circle, including his protective daughter? Only time would tell. But for now, they chose to hold on to hope, knowing that love, when genuine, could overcome even the toughest obstacles. The decision to stay together didn't magically make things easier. If anything, it made the challenges sharper, more intense. The gossip didn't fade away, it grew louder. Tabloids picked up the story, spinning wild theories about their relationship. Some called her a gold digger. Others accused him of slumming it for attention. Anonymous letters started arriving at her doorstep, filled with cruel words meant to cut deep. Strangers stared at her in public places, whispering behind her back or snapping photos without permission. It felt like the entire world had turned against her, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could handle it. She tried to keep living her life as normally as possible, but it was hard. Going to the library became a challenge because people treated her differently now. Regular patrons who used to greet her warmly now avoided eye contact or muttered under their breath. Even co-workers, who had once been friendly, seemed unsure of what to say. She felt isolated, like she was standing on one side of a glass wall while everyone else moved on with their lives. Her breaking point came one afternoon when she walked into the grocery store and overheard two women talking about her. "Can you believe she thinks she can just waltz into his life like that?" one of them said, loud enough for her to hear. "What does she even bring to the table? She's just a librarian." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She stood, frozen in the aisle, gripping the handle of her shopping cart so tightly her knuckles turned white. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not there, not in front of strangers who already judged her. Instead, she forced herself to finish her shopping and leave as quickly as possible. When she got home, she broke down. She sat on the floor of her tiny apartment, surrounded by grocery bags she hadn't bothered to unpack, and cried until her chest ached. For the first time, she questioned whether staying with him was worth it. Was she strong enough to face this kind of scrutiny every single day? Did she really want to give up the simplicity of her old life for something that felt so complicated? He showed up later that evening, unannounced. He must have sensed something was wrong because he brought her favorite ice cream and a stack of Valuar books he thought she'd enjoy. When he saw her red-rimmed eyes and the defeated slump of her shoulders, his expression softened. Without saying a word, he sat down beside her and pulled her into a hug. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I never wanted any of this for you. I hate seeing you hurt because of me." She shook her head, trying to find the right words. "It's not your fault," she finally managed, "but I don't know if I can keep doing this. Everyone judges me, and I feel like I'm losing myself." He nodded, understanding completely. "You don't deserve this," he admitted. "No one does. But running away won't solve anything. If we let them win, if we let fear and judgment tear us apart, then they've already taken everything from us." His words gave her pause. She knew he was right, but it still felt impossible to imagine fighting back against the tide of negativity. How could they possibly prove to the world that their love was real? That it wasn't about money or status, but about connection and trust? That's when inspiration struck. The next morning, he held a press conference, a bold move that shocked both supporters and critics alike. Standing in front of cameras and reporters, he looked calm and composed, though his hands betrayed a hint of nervousness. He began by thanking everyone for their concern about his personal life, but then he shifted gears, speaking directly to the woman he loved. "She saved my daughter's life," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "And she saved mine too. Before I met her, I was lost. I worked long hours, built an empire, and told myself it was enough. But it wasn't. Not until she came into my life did I realize what truly mattered: kindness, authenticity, and love. She reminds me every day that wealth doesn't define happiness, and neither does other people's opinions." Then he turned to address the skeptics. "To those who question her intentions, I say this: you don't know her. You don't see the sacrifices she makes for others, the way she lights up a room just by being herself. And to those who think our worlds are too different, I say love doesn't care about boundaries, it finds a way." By the time he finished, tears were streaming down her face as she watched the live broadcast from home. His declaration silenced some critics, but not all. There were still whispers, still harsh comments online. Yet somehow, knowing that he believed in her, that he was willing to stand up for their relationship, gave her strength she didn't know she had. Meanwhile, his daughter played a surprising role in helping them navigate the storm. At first, she had been cautious about her father's new relationship, worried that he might get hurt again after losing her mother. But as she spent more time with the woman who had saved her life, she began to see past the gossip and misunderstandings. One evening, during a quiet moment at home, she pulled her aside and said, "I don't care what people say. You're good for Daddy. You make him smile again." Those words meant everything. They reminded her why she had decided to stay, to fight for something that brought light into both their lives. With his daughter's support and his unwavering belief in their love, she found the courage to push forward. Still, external pressures weren't the only hurdles they faced. His business partner started voicing concerns, warning him that his personal life could damage the company's reputation. Board meetings became tense, with executives questioning whether he was fit to lead if he couldn't separate emotions from business decisions. The pressure mounted, threatening to spill over into every aspect of his life. Through it all, they leaned on each other. They talked late into the night, sharing fears and hopes, reminding themselves why they had chosen this path. Slowly but surely, they began to find ways to navigate the challenges together. She suggested starting a project to give back to the community, a nonprofit aimed at educating people about responsible pet ownership and preventing animal attacks. It was her way of turning the trauma of that day in the park into something positive, something meaningful. He supported her idea wholeheartedly, using his resources to help bring it to life. Together, they launched campaigns, organized workshops, and raised awareness about the importance of treating animals with care and respect. The initiative gained traction quickly, earning praise from local leaders and community members. For the first time in months, people started seeing her not as a controversial figure, but as someone dedicated to making a difference. As their efforts gained momentum, the negative voices began to fade. Not completely, of course. There would always be skeptics, but the tide was shifting. People who had once judged her harsh, unique continue. As their nonprofit project grew, so did the respect people had for her. What started as an idea born out of gratitude and resilience turned into something much bigger, a movement that touched lives across the community. Workshops were held in schools, parks, and community centers, teaching children and adults alike about how to interact safely with animals. They shared stories of real-life incidents, including the day she had saved the little girl, to show why kindness and responsibility mattered so much. Slowly but surely, perceptions began to change. People who had once whispered behind her back now approached her with smiles, thanking her for the work she was doing. Parents praised her efforts, saying it gave them peace of mind, knowing their kids were learning valuable lessons. Even some of her harshest critics softened their stance, admitting they may have misjudged her at first. It wasn't just about silencing gossip anymore. It was about proving that actions spoke louder than words. And through her dedication, she showed everyone exactly who she was, a compassionate, hard-working woman who didn't need fame or fortune to make a difference. For him, watching her transform pain into purpose filled him with pride. He saw firsthand how her quiet strength inspired others, and it reminded him why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply being herself, authentic, humble, and determined. Her success with the nonprofit also gave him a sense of clarity. For years, he had built his empire chasing profits and power, thinking that was what defined success. But seeing her pour her heart into something meaningful made him realize there was more to life than money. Inspired by her example, he started using his resources differently. Instead of focusing solely on expanding his business, he began investing in projects that benefited the community. He funded scholarships for underprivileged students, supported local artists, and helped renovate public spaces like libraries and parks. Together, they became a team, not just in their personal lives, but in their mission to create positive change. Their partnership proved that two people from different worlds could find common ground when they shared the same values. Of course, challenges didn't disappear overnight. There were still moments when doubt crept in, especially during tough days when criticism resurfaced or when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. But they learned to lean on each other during those times. Late-night conversations became their safe space where they could vent frustrations, share fears, and remind themselves why they were fighting so hard. They celebrated small victories together. A kind comment from a stranger, a successful workshop, or even just a quiet evening spent laughing over dinner. Those little moments kept them grounded and reminded them of what truly mattered. Over time, their bond deepened in ways neither of them had imagined. Love wasn't just about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about showing up every day, even when things got messy. It was about trusting each other enough to be vulnerable and supporting one another through thick and thin. For her, falling in love with someone like him had been unexpected, but it taught her that true connection transcended wealth and status. For him, loving someone like her brought light into corners of his life he hadn't known were dark. Their relationship also strengthened his bond with his daughter. Watching her interact with the woman who had saved her life, he saw a new side of his child, one that was wise beyond her years. His daughter admired her courage and appreciated the way she treated their family with genuine care. On weekends, the three of them would spend time together, whether it was baking cookies in the kitchen, taking walks in the park, or reading books aloud. Those moments brought them closer as a family, filling the void left by the loss of his wife. Though the ache of her absence remained, it no longer felt like an insurmountable weight. Instead, it became part of their story, a reminder of how love could endure even in the face of grief. Years passed and their lives continued to evolve. The nonprofit she had started flourished, earning recognition far beyond their small town. She traveled to speak at conferences, sharing her experiences and inspiring others to take action in their own communities. At first, the attention made her uncomfortable, but she soon realized it wasn't about her. It was about spreading a message of hope and responsibility. Meanwhile, he found fulfillment in balancing his business ventures with philanthropy, proving that success didn't have to come at the expense of humanity. Looking back, she often marveled at how much had changed since that fateful day in the park. Saving the little girl had set off a chain reaction that transformed not only her life, but the lives of countless others. She never imagined that one act of bravery would lead her here, to a life filled with love, purpose, and meaning. And though she still missed the simplicity of her old routine sometimes, she wouldn't trade this new chapter for anything. One evening, as they sat together on the porch of his estate watching the sunset, she turned to him and smiled. "Do you ever think about how random life is?" she asked. "If I hadn't walked through that park that day, none of this would have happened." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe," he said. "But I like to think it wasn't random. Maybe we were always meant to meet. Maybe everything that happened led us here, for a reason." She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling content. Life hadn't turned out the way she'd planned, but maybe that was the beauty of it. Sometimes the best things came from the most unexpected places. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, they sat quietly together, grateful for the journey that had brought them to this moment, and excited for whatever lay ahead.